long as you love, you will see me in the stars. As you look up at the stars, I will be there.
I'm Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear. Little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
Losing a sibling at any age is life-altering. Siblings are your first friends. They're the keeper of your earliest childhood memories, the people you expect and plan to be part of your future. In this week's podcast, Amanda Garay shares her deep love and the lifelong grief she now bears after her younger brother Christopher died by suicide 7 years ago. Chris, she says, was the perfect example of how everything seemed perfect, which is part of an important message she wants to share with our listeners. She and Colby connect in a very personal conversation about sibling love and loss. I think you'll be captivated, as I was, by Amanda's story of perseverance, and you'll be inspired by her commitment to help others whose lives have been impacted by suicide. Today, Colby and I are holding the light with Amanda Garay. Good morning, Amanda. We are honored to have you on our podcast to share your very personal story of sibling loss. We are here to celebrate Christopher's life and say his name with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're very happy to have you here. Let's start with that. I think, and you and I have talked about this, that siblings very unintentionally are often overlooked as people rush to support parents after child loss first, I think. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And did you feel like there were resources for you when this happened?
Not right away. Not right away. I had to look into them myself. And I found myself when I did try to look at it, there's not much for sibling grief. I mean, there's some stuff online, websites and stuff that talk more about it, but I didn't find like a specific grief place where I could go, like when they have the parents who have lost a child or you've lost a spouse groups. I didn't find one for sibling loss.
Right, exactly.
And how old were you when your sibling had passed away?
Almost 32, so I'll say 32.
Right, so that was something I was going to ask about too. So maybe there wasn't specific grief counseling with regards to losing a sibling, but from my experience, when my sister had passed away, I was very young. And so for me, there was a lot of safety nets around me. I had the community, I had my friends, my family. I was exercising a lot with sports. There was just a lot of great people around me at that time. I imagine your situation was very different being an adult. Did you have any safety nets around you to kind of fall back on at that time, or where were you in your life when that happened?
When Chris passed away, I was living with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and my 2-year-old and my 4-month-old. So I was in mommy mode when this happened. And my 4-month-old had a very major surgery, so I have this heart baby with heart issues and dealing, with all that. And then I got told what happened the next day. And I will say my biggest support was my husband at the time. My parents came up. I was an hour away. They came and they told me the unfortunate news, and then they pretty much jumped on a plane to Nashville that day. And at that point in time, a lot of my family, some of my family was in Florida for the winter. A cousin was in New York. So it was pretty isolating. And my parents stayed in Nashville for the whole week. So it was me and my husband. And a lot of people would reach out and call, and friends of the family, my friends, my family. But my main support at that time was my husband.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful that he was there for you. But you also didn't have that initial observance of your parents either.
Right. Like the shock of, I still remember everything about that day when they came and told me, because they just showed up at my house. And then like an hour, they were going home to pack and then flying out to Nashville. So I didn't even really get to kind of grieve right there. And I think when it first happens, you're not even grieving yet. You're just in shock mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I didn't even get to have that shock mode really with them because they had to go.
All right. And how did your parents respond to your grief? Because obviously, when I was, experiencing a lot of mine, my parents were still in that phase with our relationship where they had to be that adult role in my life and sort of organize some of these outlets for me to heal. How were they handling your grief at that time?
My parents are wonderful and they checked on me as much as they could, but they were away dealing with everything that they had to deal with in Nashville. So as much as they tried, it was more me and more me trying to check on them to see if they're okay. Like I honestly felt like I was my parents' parent at that point in time, trying to make sure they were okay. Like I took that role on for them. And, when you lose a sibling and your only sibling, it's hard. You've got to be the strength for your parents, and help them get through this journey because now that I have 3 kids, I can't imagine what that is like and I hope I never have to. Yeah, you kind of become your parents like strength and help them get through what they're having to go through.
Absolutely. And I have maybe another question sort of similar to that. With regards to your parents, I know the manner in which your brother had passed away. For an older generation, sometimes that can be really hard to understand and to come to grips with. Did that play a role maybe in you sort of feeling like you had to look over them and support them? How did they handle dealing with losing a child to suicide?
I think it was a complete shock. It was a complete shock. My mom always told me that there was something about Chris that she always worried about, that she never worried about me, but there was just something about Chris that she always worried about. So I don't know if deep in her heart, she always knew something was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely something we hadn't really ever talked about as a family before, suicide or mental illness. So it's definitely something we talk about a lot now. And, I talk about with my own family, my oldest. So they've been really good with it. It was very hard at first. Like my dad probably for the first 2 years couldn't even talk about Chris, with me. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew like if I talked about Chris, he'd probably get upset. But now he's turned the corner and he's doing much better.
Yeah.
Tell us about the months leading up to February 8th, 2015. What was that like?
Actually, it was really good. I was thinking about this last night. Like Chris lived in Nashville for 4 years prior to his passing. So we didn't get to see him very much. My parents went down a couple times, but that fall I had gotten to see him multiple times. He had come up for my son's birth. His best friend was getting married, so my son decided to come a little early, so he didn't make it for the birth, but he was there for his surgery. He had heart surgery when he was 9 days old. So one of my best memories now is of my brother in the waiting room eating whoopie pies and doing crossword puzzles while my baby's having heart surgery. It makes me laugh, but it's a wonderful memory. And then a month or so later, my parents got to see him again at another friend's wedding. And then I got to see him at Christmas, and we had this amazing time. It was quick. It was a quick visit, but we got to make memories, and I just back at it and just so thankful that I got to see him more during those couple months than I had prior. Sometimes we would go half of a year or if not longer without seeing him. So, it was actually the couple months prior were really good. This is my perception, but knowing Chris, he would never have put anything on me knowing what I was going through with my son. And I wish he would have reached out to me and let me know that he was at a breaking point because, I'm don't like flying, but I would have jumped on a plane and gone right to help. I know he kept that in and at least didn't talk to me about it because he knew what I was going through at that point in time.
Yeah, it must be sort of strange when you look back on it thinking that in that year beforehand, you only had a handful of times that you'd see him again. You probably didn't think about that, as you were going through that year that, oh, now there's only 3 more chances or 2 more chances. It's just so strange, these isolated incidents, and we just take them to be normal. And in hindsight, they, kind of the last things that we have to hold on to, our last memories of those people.
And I will tell you this, like once he moved to Nashville, every time he came home, I cried when he left.
Yeah.
And he told me, it's like, Amanda, you've got to stop crying. You make it hard for me. I'm not going to come back if you don't stop crying. And the last day I saw him, that Christmas Day, he was going to fly out with his fiance to go to her parents' house. I gave him this big hug and a kiss on the cheek, and I didn't cry. I don't know why. It's like I knew I was going to see him in a couple months because he was going to get married. For some reason, like I didn't cry. I was like so proud of myself, and just
Well, you're taking your little brother's advice, right?
I did. I listened to him, and I was okay, and everything was okay, and.
So before I ask this, do you dislike it when people ask you were there warning signs? Because of course there's educational value in sharing, but I wonder if that feels disrespectful to ask because of the stigma surrounding suicide.
No, not at all. Were there warning signs? Hindsight, there were. Then, like I told you, like we didn't really talk about suicide or mental illness. It wasn't something I ever really dealt with.
Right.
And so we didn't know things like he drank a lot, obviously, probably covering the pain. There was things he had said over the years, over many years, to different friends, and he would make different comments about possibly hurting himself. And I've always felt that if he had made these comments to one particular person, it would have set off big red flags. But he kind of sprinkled them places, not to the same people, where sometimes, if somebody just says one thing, you're not going to really think about it. But if they keep making comments, your mind's going to change and be like, okay, I need to talk to this person, get this person help. So hindsight, yes, there were the comments that he made and stuff like that, but we didn't realize it before. And it was hard because he was in Nashville for 4 years. So whenever we saw him in person, it was happy, at weddings or when he came to visit for holidays and stuff like that. And he was really good about hiding stuff. So, I mean, he could have been suffering completely every time we saw him, but he presented that he was happy and he was, enjoying himself. And whenever I talked to him on the phone, because we would talk on the phone a lot or FaceTime with him, with my oldest son, because I wanted my children to know their uncle, even though he lived far away. He always seemed happy, and he just laugh, happy, exciting, but he was very good at hiding stuff.
Was he just somebody who was hiding them from embarrassment, or is it just because he didn't want others to feel concern for him, or?
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he wanted everybody to be concerned about him. And I feel like with mental illness, people don't react the same. Like my husband has stage 4 cancer. And when someone's diagnosed with cancer, everyone rallies around you and they want to help you.
Right.
But sometimes with mental illness, it's not treated the same way. And some people look down on it or they think it's a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure he probably felt it was a weakness. He was this huger than life personality. And I think he probably saw it as a weakness, and he didn't want to show that to people.
Yeah, I think especially within male circles too, it's not talked about. There's a lot of eye rolling when the conversation comes up. It's just not always a very healthy space or encouraging environment to be vulnerable with people, especially about something that's so personal.
And I think some people assume that everybody else, if they were to be vulnerable, would think badly of them or negative them or think they were weak, where I think now there's a lot of people who would be extremely happy if somebody opened up to them. And I always tell people, if you're thinking of anything or you need any help, please reach out to me. I won't judge you. I'm just here if you need me.
And there are a lot of resources out there for people. And part of our role here today is to share those. So we'll put those in the show notes of resources that we have available here in our community and further. You've been pretty public, though, about the way Chris died.
Yeah.
And you've gotten involved in lots of things that honor him in that way with hospice volunteers, specifically facilitating lost suicide support groups. Tell us about that. Has that been really difficult, or is that really helpful for your healing?
It's actually been really helpful for my healing. So I first started out as a facilitator for children.
Can I ask how soon after you did that? Because that's amazing.
About 6 months.
Whoa.
And I happened to know another facilitator, and I had talked to her about it, and she's like, "Oh, I think you'll be great." So I did that, and honestly, the training itself was like therapy for me.
Yeah.
So it helped not only me, but I was able to help children who are grieving too. And it's kind of trickled down into my own life with my children. I'm able to help them, even though cancer is different than death. Cancer is hard. So everything I've learned through the training has helped me with my own children that way. But then one session I was unable to do the kids, and they were like, "Oh, well, we'd rather you do the survivors of suicide group." And I'm like, "Oh, okay," which is completely different. You know what I mean? Sometimes kids just want to talk about their dog. They don't want to talk anything about
Right.
the death that they're there for, where being with adults is definitely more intense. It's definitely a lot harder, but it's very helpful, and I'm able to share my story with others and they can see how far I've come. Just being around others who have suffered the same type of loss, even though every loss is different because every relationship is different. Suicide is just a totally different type of death, and there's things that people have to deal with for a long time after, like guilt and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm sure in the past you've probably done the whole what if thing. If I had called more, if I had, flown out to Nashville a couple more times. Do your parents do that at all? Do you know?
Yeah, like I know my dad, Chris had been at a work conference the week prior, and he had just gotten home that weekend, and my dad said he was going to call him the night before, that night that he passed actually. But he didn't, because he just wanted him to get settled back into the home, and that he was going to call him the next day. My mom had been emailing with him that night about flying out to do more preparation for his wedding, and everything seemed normal. That night, I had sent him a picture of my oldest playing with a toy that Chris had gotten him for Christmas, and he never responded. And that was not like him. And even that night, I was like, that's weird. Chris didn't, respond to the picture. Normally he would send some funny comment back. So, I mean, even I do it. Like, why didn't I just call him after he didn't text me back?
Yeah, I feel like it's almost two conflicting aspects of many people's sort of like innate nature, which is when these sorts of things happen, we like to validate our relationships with these people. Like, I could have changed this. I loved him, he loved me. There's some way that I could have played a role in preventing this. But what that opens the door to is the ability now to blame yourself and to sort of put more guilt on your own shoulders, which works against your self-interest and makes things harder. So it's
Yeah.
just such an interesting dynamic. I oftentimes will do that as well, because in the way that Cassidy had passed, I had offers to go on that hayride that night with a friend who just happened to not, have the stomach for it, because he's a little bit nervous and shyish around those sorts of experiences. And so I didn't end up going. But if I had said, well, too bad, I'm going to go with them anyways, maybe something's different. But that you can do that for hours. You can just run your mind in circles doing that.
Right. Totally agree.
And it's interesting too. Do you find yourself kind of putting yourself in these, like, I don't want to use the word fraternal, but that's colloquially, I guess it kind of works, because I know certainly with regards to sibling, when I meet someone who's lost a sibling, I instantly feel sort of like this kinship to them, like this relationship. Do you feel that as well with like people who have lost siblings or people who have lost loved ones to suicide?
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially working with adults who have lost someone to suicide, like in those groups, their spouses, their siblings, and especially when I meet somebody who's lost a sibling and their only sibling, yeah, you have a special bond with them.
Yeah. How do you answer that question when people come up to you and they go, "Oh, do you have any siblings?"
I say yes.
Yeah.
That I have a brother
Yeah, I do as
named
well.
Chris.
Yeah, I think that's great.
He lives in heaven now.
Right.
I don't want people to forget about him.
Yeah. That's why I love coming home. It's so nice to see so many photos of Cass up and things like that. Because when I was doing my undergraduate, there was hardly any of that. So I'm sure it's always nice at family gatherings and things to see so many people who share in your grief and in your love for Chris.
Yes.
I think siblings they take on such a powerful role after the passing, especially if it's your only sibling. And you told me, Amanda, that you said, I am his memory keeper. What do you mean by those words? What does that mean to you?
Like, I feel like it's my job to keep Chris's memory alive. I don't want people to forget about Chris. And I don't know if you guys have dealt with this too, but a lot of people, after you lose somebody, don't want to talk about them to you. And they're afraid that it's going to make you upset. Like my parents and I love talking about Chris, and we love hearing about Chris, and we love seeing new pictures of Chris. It's their gifts, they're these treasures. And, my children at the time were 2 and 4 months old, and now I have three. And they're 9, 7, and 5. And they can all tell you about Uncle Chris. They know Uncle Chris because we talk about him all the time. His pictures up all over the place. The day after he passed away, I started a Facebook group in memory of him, and it's still going. I post now every Thursday, Throwback Thursday, pictures of Chris. Thankfully, my parents are obsessed with taking pictures, and we have lots of them. And now I do the same for my kids. That's been nice because then people randomly will post pictures that they found, and that's, like I said, a gift. It's like, oh, a new picture. Yay. It's like so exciting. And other ways we've tried to keep his memory alive is we started a scholarship at Winslow for an athlete. So that's been nice because every spring, my family, my parents and I, we each read every single application and we pick one together in his memory. And then we have a golf tournament in his memory because he was a huge golfer.
And you said the proceeds for that support a camp, is that correct?
Yes. So the proceeds go to Camp Kita, which is a camp held in Maine, started by 3 Maine siblings who lost their father to suicide. And it's only for kids who have survived the loss of a loved one to suicide. So they get to go to camp for free, thanks to donations like the ones that we're able to make. And they just spend a week doing normal camp activities, but also working with grief counselors. They have 24/7 trauma support. So it's an amazing cause, and I know he's proud of us.
Oh, that's really amazing. Very inspiring.
You guys are inspiring too.
Oh, thank you. What advice would you give siblings just beginning the grief journey that you've been on already?
That it does get, I wouldn't say easier, but it gets different, and it's not as hard. I love Chris, and I think about him all the time. I think about him now way more than I did when he was alive. He was even my best friend when he was alive. You know what I mean? So I don't mean that in a bad way, but it does. It gets easier. At first, your heart is crushed, and it's like this post that I had found where grief comes in waves, and you know what I mean? And at first, it's just so hard, and these waves just splash on you and tear you down, and then they just get, not as high, and they get less often. So it doesn't get easier, but it just gets different. You learn to live yourself. You find yourself again after, I should say.
Yeah, I think we would kind of phrase it like finding our new normal.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a new normal. Your life's never going to be the same. I'm never going to be the same Amanda that I was before Chris died. Because when Chris died, part of my heart went with him. And I am now this version of Amanda.
Do you have any particular dates or events that you celebrate Chris on? Like, do you do something for his birthday or around the holidays?
No, I've realized like some, like his birthday or the anniversary date, like one parent doesn't mind being with people and wants to be around, and the other parent would rather be by themselves. Me, it depends on the day and how I'm feeling that year on that specific day. So we don't do anything special, I would say, because we all have our own ways of dealing with that day.
Right.
I would say the biggest day that we celebrate is like the day that we have the golf tournament, and memories that way with all his friends and stuff like that.
And those are hard too, right?
Those are hard. I always have a good cry as soon as I get to the golf course and see his big picture, and then I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think I shared with you my emotion is at the end of the events when everyone has been there and they're so excited to see each other, and then everyone walks away and you have this realization of, oh, that's why we're here. Like it comes crashing down on you again. I wish we weren't here doing what we're doing. I wish that Cassidy was here, and I'm sure you feel the same way about Chris.
Totally. And it's kind of like after somebody dies, everything's crazy and everyone's around you, and then the funeral happens and then everybody goes home. But you're still there. You're still dealing with it,
Right, exactly.
And at the time, maybe I'm getting the timeline mixed up here. You hadn't had any children yet, correct?
No, I had two.
You had two. Okay.
Yeah, I had a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old.
So has sharing Chris and his life and his experiences with your children helped in the grieving process at all?
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, I don't want them to. Well, Layla, she never met him, but like the other two,
Mm-hmm.
forget him, and I, want Layla to know who he was too,
Right.
because if it didn't happen, she would get her fun Uncle Chris, because I know he would have been the best uncle, around. He would have sent them back home with probably huge amounts of stuff and been like, "Here, now's mommy, just take care of you." No, just talking to them, I feel like just talking about him makes me feel better, and I
Mm-hmm.
want them to know him and remember him, and so yeah, I would say it has helped.
Mm-hmm. Do they have a relationship with him in any way? Your children? Do they call him Uncle Chris when they see photos? Do they remember him in any capacity?
Yeah, my oldest does a little bit, but you can ask all three and they can point out Uncle Chris in pictures. They know who
Mm-hmm.
he is.
Yeah.
And when we see his friends or like cousins, sometimes they'll tell him things about Chris and how he was.
Mm-hmm.
And even to my daughter, they'll talk about him. And around the passing this year, actually, I lied when I say we don't normally do things, but it was before COVID. Around his passing date, my mom would hold a memorial mass for him at a church, and then we would go to a restaurant with his friends and family members, whoever would come. So, yes, we did do that. But yeah, no, just talking to him about him. And again, I'm his memory keeper, and I want them to know that they do have an uncle. He's not here with us. We believe in heaven. They know he lives in heaven. I want them to make sure that they know, because he's part of my life and part of who I am, because I grew up with my brother.
Is your family pretty spiritual and religious?
My parents, yeah. Me,
Mm-hmm.
more so since he's died. I've
Mm-hmm.
read a lot about it, and I'm more spiritual because I want to know where he is, and I want to know
Right.
that he's okay. So it's that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Sometimes I feel like I go off on a tangent. I want to
Mm-hmm.
know where he is, and I want to know that he's okay.
Right. Right.
Um,
I'd like to turn that question on you, Colby, because you are not married and you don't have children. And how will you keep Cassidy's memory alive with your own family?
Well, assuming that the family thing happens, yeah, I imagine. For a long time, I debated whether or not I wanted to use Cassidy's name in any capacity with moving forward in my family, and I just don't know if I feel comfortable doing that. But absolutely, her photos will be around me in any home or apartment that I'll be living in, and absolutely, I do plan to celebrate her birthday and find the various sort of ritualistic things that we do, like the sun rises and ice cream before dinner and things like that here and there to remember her. Absolutely. I think I'll probably have to assess that more as it's coming up, It's so distant right now that I'm not quite sure how I want to do that yet.
Yeah, well, Amanda, you say you're the keeper of his memories. Colby always feels like he's the keeper of Cassidy's light.
oh, that's so sweet.
Did you ever have any, in this, this is maybe a little bit more dark or depressive in nature of a question, but did you ever have any anxiety or fear once you sort of grasp the concept of being an only sibling?
Yes,
Yeah.
because our parents are obviously older than us, and
Right.
usually parents go first. Once my parents are gone, it's me now,
Mm-hmm.
and that's scary. I do have a wonderful cousin who's was right in between Chris and I. So she's like a sister to me, and I have another cousin, so I know they'll always be there for me, but it's different when it's not your sibling. So now I
Right.
know I'm going to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of sounds bad, but Chris used to joke that, you take care of mom and dad and I'll pay you. You know what I mean? Like, you'll be in charge, you're the more responsible one, and it's like, Chris, you left me. You left
Right.
it all on my shoulders to take care of them, when they get older. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a lonely feeling.
Yeah, that for me, especially where I don't have any family structures around me, which that may or may not help. I don't know. But in my mind, I feel as though it might help to have some extended family or just family structure in place. Whereas right now, I'm still just doing my independent 20s thing. And so that idea of, oh, if something ever happened to my parents, I really am just kind of floating out here by myself.
Scary.
I mean, I have a lot of friends that are family and a lot of family as well, but they're distant in terms of geographical location, so we're not as close as we could be. But, it makes me very nervous for what that looks like.
Totally understand that.
Yeah.
So, one final question, if we can. We like to give all of our guests this time to reflect. So, we'd like to ask the question, how would you like us to remember your brother?
I would like people to remember my brother as an amazing person. He was funny, he was caring, he was charming. He probably would have come on here and charmed both of you, and you guys would have instantly loved him. He was so quick-witted. He could come back with a joke right away, where I'm that person that takes 10 minutes to think about what I should have said 10 minutes ago. But he was just loving and caring, and he was beautiful on the inside and the outside. And after he passed, tons of people have just told me how kind he was to them and how nice he was to them, and proud of him for how he was when he was here.
Well, I'm absolutely sure that he'd be incredibly proud of you and all the work that you do to keep his legacy alive, as well as improve the situations and lives of others around you that have experienced similar loss. I think that's really incredible what you've managed to accomplish and how many lives you've changed doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, your story is very inspiring, and I think it will help many others who are on this grieving journey as siblings. You give them hope, I guess, when it's really dark, right? You bring the light. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
As long as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love.